Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and get started then. So today I'm going to be going through a spouse client file from start to finish, and it's going to be really open-ended. So if you have any questions, just feel free to either unmute yourself and jump in with your question or send it through the Zoom chat. So this is the screen that you get to when you first log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients that you added in. To add a new client, you go up to the Add button, and the key fields are first name, last name. We've got a question. For a new client, how do I email the questionnaire? So for a new client, to email the questionnaire, you're going to put in their email, whatever their email is, 123@gmail.com. And then you click this Use Questionnaire box. And then when you go to add the client to the system, this is a bad email. But when you go to add the client to the system, it's going to give you a prompt as to where you can choose whether you want to send the questionnaire from your own email, where it's going to give you a link, and you just copy that link into an email and send it to the client. And that way you can sort of customize the email a bit more. Or you can just send it directly from eState Planner. So once you choose this option, it'll just send them an email directly from the program. So you've got sort of these two options. And then basically the client's going to receive a link. They click on it. Then they're prompted to create their own password just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to do it all in one sitting. And then they basically go through and put in their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they put into that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it's going to save a lot of time on the manual entry. But you don't have to use the client questionnaire if you don't want. So if you didn't want to use the client questionnaire, you just wouldn't worry about putting an email in, and you wouldn't click that Use Questionnaire box. And then there wouldn't be any questionnaire sent to the client. So you could use your own Word or PDF questionnaire, or you could do it live in the client meeting with them. So it's just up to you what your preferences are. And since today we're doing a spouse client file, this means that we're doing wills for both spouses. So it means that we need to add them both as separate clients into the system, and then we can link them together using the spouse client function. So you just go to this Add button, and we're going to add the second spouse in. I'm going to say Lauren Collins. And then the key thing is this spouse client field. So you're going to click it, and you're going to pick the name of the first spouse. So you need to add the first spouse into the system just so that they'll be in the system, so you're able to select them from the drop-down list. But when you're adding the second spouse, this is when you do that spouse client field. And by linking them together, this is going to mean that any shared family tree or asset information, any joint asset, is going to be automatically populating in both of their profiles. And then you've also got the option to sync the scenarios and the appointments, so the planning between the two spouses, if it's going to be more of a mirrorball situation. So then we're going to add in Lauren. And next, you just choose who you want to go into. So which profile you want to start with. I'm going to pick Ben, so I'll just click on his name. And this is what the family tree is going to look like if you haven't sent the questionnaire, or if you have, but the client hadn't filled it out yet. So you're going to start with the client and the spouse. And usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. So you can just double click on the icon, and it's going to bring up all this additional information. And really the key thing for anyone on the family tree are going to be first name, last name, and gender, just so that the wording of the will comes out properly. The also known as field for the client will populate in the will. It won't for anyone else, but it will for the client. Date of birth, let's say June 19th, 1956. And that age will automatically populate for you. Country of birth, let's say Canada. You could do multiple citizenships. Then all this other information, this is good to have on your client to make sure you've done an adequate investigation, but it's not going to affect the will generation itself. Then residency is important because province specifically, however you set the province as here, is how the system's going to know to generate the probate tax on the assets tab. But it's also how the system's going to know which precedent to generate. So if you're from Nova Scotia, BC, or Alberta, you're going to want to make sure that province is changed to the correct province to make sure your correct precedents are generated. The city field is also important because it will populate in the will. So Ben's from the City of Toronto, they'll say Ben of the City of Toronto. Special circumstances for the client is a place where you can note any potential capacity issues. So you just check the box and then you'd write a description in below, just to make sure this stuff is really well documented in case there were to be a will challenge down the line. And then relationship, it's just telling you who they're tied to on the family tree or other people in the system, how they're related. It's just more of a list. This add button is only if you're trying to kind of fix a relationship. So if you've entered in someone as a child instead of a spouse or something like that, and you want to fix it without having to delete them and re-add them, you can use this. But don't use this to just add other people. You're going to go back to this add button over here to do that. And now let's say we wanted to add a child. So on the family tree, adding people works through direct relationships. So you're just going to click on the icon of the individual that you want to add to, and then that blue circle will be around them. And you go up to the add button and select their relationship. Whenever you're adding a child, you're going to get this little prompt as to who the other parent is. If it's the current spouse, if it's an ex-spouse that you want to be adding to the system because they're going to be involved in the will, or if they're a single parent. So either the ex-spouse is not going to be involved or they're genuinely a single parent. You've got those three options. I'm going to say it's Lauren. And then you can enter the child's information in. I'll say John Collins, date of birth, July 20th, 2000. Then the special circumstances section for anyone that's not the client. This is a place where you can sort of note relationship difficulties or estrangement. But most importantly is this disability function. So if the individual is disabled, you're going to want to make sure to check that disability box so that the system can pick up on the fact that this is a disabled individual. In the scenarios, if you're creating a trust for them, then it's going to draft a special Henson trust clause in the will. So this is the key right here, this little box. Next, let's say we wanted to add a grandchild. So adding grandchildren works through direct relationships. So you can't just add a grandchild directly to Ben. What you have to do is add a child to Ben, click on the child's icon and add a child to that child. We're going to say he's a single parent. And then that's how you get the grandchild's information in the system. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You click on the client's icon, add a sibling to the client, click on the sibling's icon, add a child to the sibling. If there's going to be anyone else involved in the will in either a beneficiary or a trustee capacity, you can go over to this All tab right here. And it's going to list everyone that you've added into the system, but it's also going to allow you to add in people that aren't family. So you just go to this Add button, and let's say Jordy's going to be a beneficiary later on. So I'm going to add him in here. Jordy Ayton, male. And then you click Add, it's going to ask you how they're related. So who are they related to? They're related to Ben, the client. And how are they related? So let's just say he's a friend of Ben's. And then we'll add that in there. So that's sort of the people section. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. The next section is assets. And this is where you're going to add all of the client's assets into the system. You're always going to start with the general personal effects. And this is just to remind you to gift them to someone in the will because it'll generate a special disposition of personal effects clause. For any other assets, you can add all the client's assets and value them and give them a sense of what the net value of their estate's looking like at this point in time. But really for the will generation purposes itself, the only assets that you need to add in are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for in the will. So you just go up to the Add button, you pick your sort of category and then your type within the category. And for any asset that you're adding to the system, the most important field is really this asset name field, because this is how the asset's going to be identified throughout the system and in the will if it's going to be a specific asset bequest. So I put all the identifying information in this asset name field. So I call RBC bank account, account number, whatever. And that way, if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts and they're all called bank account or bank account copy, it's going to be confusing as to which one is which. But if I know this is the RBC bank account, the other one's the CIB savings account, then I can sort of differentiate and make sure I'm planning for the correct asset. Balance for the value, you don't have to put it in, but it will make the summaries look a lot nicer. So let's just say that it's $100,000. We have a question. Some clients do not want to disclose exactly the value of the assets that they have, but just the types disclosed because of privacy. Is this okay? Yeah, it's totally okay. So you can leave the value at 0 if you want. You don't have to put the values in at all. It's more just to get a sense for the planning if you want to be sort of more intricate in that. But for the will generation, you really don't need to know the exact values of the assets. For things like RRSPs and stuff, it's good to get a sense of whether it's a sizable RRSP because that may affect how you plan the will. But if they don't feel comfortable disclosing for the will generation, you don't need to include them in the system. If you're putting in a value, though, it will automatically calculate the probate tax for you according to whatever you've set the client's residency as. So we've set it as Ontario law, so that's how it's calculating here. Next, let's say we want to go real estate home. So again, I'm going to change the name. Maybe they've got multiple homes. This one's the family home. If you are gifting it as a specific asset bequest, this address field will populate in the will. Current value, let's say it's $1 million. So the mortgage/encumbrances field, this is important because if there's a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of the mortgage in this field here, because not only is it good to know sort of what asset the debt is associated with, but also it has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated for this asset. The next section is debts, and there's an opportunity to add a mortgage in there, but really you want to add it in here if you're adding it in on the specific asset. But just make sure really the key thing is don't add it in both places. So don't add it in this field and as a separate debt on the debts tab because it will double count it. So just add it in one place, and best practice is just right on this field. Then ownership. So here we've got tenants. You can do joint, tenants in common. We're going to do joint, and you can pick the other joint owner, Lauren. And because Lauren's a spouse, if we were to switch over to her profile, we see this family home asset is already in her list of assets. Okay, we've got another question. When a client's a shareholder in a corporation that owns shares in another company, what would be the best way to include shares in the latter company in the asset section? So I would just include the corporation in their list of assets, not the corporations that own shares in another company. So I would just include whatever their ownership is in that first corporation and not anything that the corporation owns, just to be sure that you're showing sort of your assets specifically. No problem. Multiple wills. So if you are doing multiple wills, the one key thing you want to be doing on the asset tab is to be adding in the private company shares and then making sure you put in this corporation name field right here, because that's going to be what populates in the secondary will. So if you want to make sure that this specific corporation is referenced in the secondary will, then just match the asset name and the corporation name, but that's really the key field there. Let's go for one more. We'll go for an RSP. So again, I can change that information. It's the RBC, RSP, whatever account number is. Beneficiary, this is just whoever the current beneficiary is on the policy. So you'll be able to either change or confirm this beneficiary later on if you want to. This is just information. Current value, let's say it's $100,000. So the probate tax always automatically calculates for you, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the client's sort of variability in tax brackets. So what we usually like to do is show the highest possible tax the asset can incur. So for something like an RSP, we put in like 50% of that. For something like an asset with a capital gain, do like 25% of that, just to show, sort of to give a sense of the highest possible tax it could incur. So that's the asset section. Any other questions here? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. So debts, like I said before, it's just more for planning. It's not going to affect the actual generation of the will. You don't want to add in a mortgage because we already added it in on the assets tab and we don't want to double count it. But let's just say there's a credit card debt. So we'll just put in the credit card debt of $5,000. Then we're going to get to the scenario. So this is really the most important part of the system. It's where all the planning occurs. And the idea is that you go through each one of these three scenarios, depending on your client's situation, and you create a plan for each of them. So you're covering your bases. So you start with surviving spouse. So this is the plan that you create if the spouse is still alive when the client passes. Then descendants only. So the spouse is gone, but there's still kids or grandkids around. And then lastly, no descendants. So this is like your ultimate disaster. What's happening if everyone's gone? And so there's two ways you can do it. You can go through it manually by clicking into a scenario and going through each of the three sections. So the first one is this joint designated asset section. And this is where you're going to drag and drop anything that's joint or designated to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Then you've got initial gifts. So this is where you're going to do your specific asset requests or your cash legacies. And then the balance of the estate. And this is how you're dividing up your residue. And there's two ways to do it. You can either do it by adding segments and gifts within the segments, or you can run a macro if it's a common residue breakdown and it's already on our list. So you can do it that way. Or if you're dealing with more of a typical client situation where it's like everything to spouse, everything to kids, what you can do is go up to this little lightning bolt button and run an E-plan. So an E-plan is basically like a giant macro that goes through each of the scenarios and the appointment sections for you and creates a plan, depending on which one you choose. And the nice thing about it is you can choose one, even if it doesn't match all the details of what you want to do. If it's sort of similar or like it has a similar ideas, you could run it and then you just go into each scenario and you make the changes that you want. But this way you're not starting from scratch, so it will probably save you at least some time. So I'm going to click this spouse with younger children 2 distributions trust 1. And now I'm still in the surviving spouse scenario. I can see that in the joint designated assets section, it's given the RRSP and the family home to Lauren to show that it's falling outside of the estate. We go directly to her. Initial gifts, you've got the general personal effects going to Lauren because that's going to generate that specific, the disposition of personal effects clause in the will. So you need to make sure to gift the general personal effects as an initial gift in order to trigger that clause. And then the balance of the estate, we're going to click on the gray bar twice to see the details. So it's showing us the beneficiaries, Lauren, absolute 100%. There's no gift over because that second scenario, descendants only, that's going to be our gift over. So I don't need to put anything here. So this is good. So this is everything I would have wanted to do in this scenario. So I can just go to the next one. I don't need to make any changes here. Nothing that's joint or designated. Initial gifts, you've got the general personal effects going to the class of children. Let me just show you how you would do it manually if you had to. So for any specific asset request, you just drag and drop the green box over. Then you pick your beneficiaries, either people, classes, or charities. I'm going to do the class of children. And then whenever you're doing a class or more than one beneficiary for the general personal effects, you can also select a distribution method. If you want, as they agree, if you want trustees' discretion or a lottery, you can do multiple options as well. Then for the balance of the estate, you just click on this gray bar again and twice to see the detail. So it's showing us it's a trust for the children, 100%, same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30. I want to change this to 25. And then stage lump sums, I'm going to change this at 21, they get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over first to beneficiaries issue, then to the other class members. And then I'll save. So now I've created my trust for the children that I wanted with the details that I wanted, but I used the E-plan, so I didn't have to start from scratch. So it was a great way to save time, but ultimately I still ended up with the trust that I wanted to create with the details that I wanted to have in it. Then this little button up in the top corner, this is the sync button. So this will sync this scenario, this descendants only scenario, over to Lauren's profile as well. So if Lauren's gonna also want the same thing for her descendants only scenario, you click that button and it will copy it over. And what it copies over is anything that's joint, and it will copy over the residue breakdown as well. It's just not gonna copy over solely owned assets because it wouldn't be their asset to give away. So that's descendants only. Then we'll go to the last one, the no descendants. So the macro or the E-plan that we ran gave half to siblings, half to spousal siblings, but I can just clear it and not plan for the scenario. Maybe they have a ton of kids and grandkids, never think it's gonna get this far, then I don't have to create a plan here. But let's say I want to give half to Jordy and half to a charity. So I'm going to do this manually by adding segments and creating gifts within the segments. So because I want to do half and half, I'm going to start by going segment 1 for 50%. So now I've kind of created that 50%, but I have to specify what's happening to it. So I do that by adding a gift. I'm going to pick Jordy as my beneficiary. Absolute, 100%. This means 100% of the 50% segment. So I don't want to divide up that 50% even further. I want all of the 50% to go to Jordy. And then I'll put a gift over into his issue. So now if I look at the green circles, I can see of this outer 50%, I've dealt with 100% of it. So I don't need to add any more gifts or anything here because I've already given everything away. What I need to do is deal with that other 50%. And I do that by going to segments and then adding my second segment for the other 50. And then I'll add a gift. This time I'm going to do a charity. If you search it in this search bar, it's going to search the CRA database for you automatically. So I can see it's already pulled the registration number and all the details for the charity. And absolute, and I'll add that in. So now I've dealt with 100% of this 50% and therefore 100% of everything. And I can sync it over to Lauren if she wants the same plan there. So that's the scenario section. I know it could be kind of a lot to digest, but does anyone have any questions here? No? Okay. We'll go to appointments. So this is where you're going to appoint your state trustees and your guardians if you need to. And because we ran that E-plan, it's already made Lauren the primary state trustee. So to add anyone else, you go to the add button. You can do people or trust corporations, and their specific trust clauses will populate in the will. I'm going to pick Jordy. And then condition is how you decide sort of what's happening, if they're going to be a primary or an alternate. So if you select none, then there'll be a primary. If you put a condition on it, then there'll be an alternate. So I'm going to pick if all specified cannot act. That's usually the condition I use. And then I just make sure the name on the specified line is correct. So it's going to say Lauren. If Lauren can't, Jordy. Maybe I want to do a further alternate. I'm going to do the same condition, but I'm going to change the specified to Jordy. So now it's going to go Lauren. If Lauren can't act, Jordy. If Jordy can't act, John. I can sync this over to Lauren in the top corner. Then we've got provisions. So there's a couple of things here. If you want the funeral arrangements in the will, you can type them on the line, or you can just get rid of the text and there won't be a body disposition clause. Include future members. This is if you are doing class gifts in the will and you want to include future members of the class in the definition. So in that second scenario, we use the class of children. So if I check this box, when it defines children in the will, it's going to say John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. Same kind of thing with class restrictions. You can restrict certain members of being part of a class. This is your general trust for beneficiaries under a certain age. So it's going to guide underage beneficiaries you haven't set up specific trusts for in the will, like if it went to a grandchild through a gift over, for example. And then secondary will assets. This is the other key thing if you're doing multiple wills. Then here's where you can pick and choose which definitions you want included in the secondary will. So it's not like they necessarily have to have these kind of assets. It's just a definition of what the secondary will could include. But if you're doing a single will, you don't have to check or uncheck. It won't affect it. Then up in the top corner, this little exclamation button in the circle, these are advisor insights. So it's like contextual alerts that's helping to advise you to make sure you haven't missed any important planning considerations. Some will go away, like if I went back and put in a gender, but some of them are always here, like request prior wills. So it's more just a resource and to make you more confident in your plan. Beside that is notes. You can make any notes on your client here, and they appear at the end of the text summary. And then this is the last button, the generation button, where you generate all your documents in your summary. So first of all, there's 3 summaries. There's the profile, and it's going to give you all the information on everybody in the family tree, all the asset details, and all the debts. And this is great to give to the client after the planning meeting to make sure that they check over and make sure that all the spelling of names are correct, all the asset details are correct, that kind of thing. Beside that is the graphic scenario summary. So it's a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. And if you're putting in values on the assets tab, this is going to look a lot nicer. But again, you don't have to put in values for the purposes of the will. Then you've got your text scenario summary. So it's going to give you all the information on everything that you've done. So who are your estate trustees? What gifts have you created? What's falling outside of the estate? How have you divided up the residue? It's like the will without the legalese. So those are the summaries. Then these are all the different documents you can generate. Today we're going to do a single will. You can always change the signing date or take it out and put it in later. Registered asset designation. This is if you want the registered assets to be confirmed or to do new designations in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation is basically something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held in resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing counterpart. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. The will guide is a nice guide at the end that's going to guide to the different clause in the will. And then a cover page is just a cover page. So you've got another question. What method of file storage do you recommend? Is this all stored on your cloud? Should we keep a hard paper copy and a digital file and your cloud copy of documents? So with eState specifically, it saves all the data and stuff in the cloud, but it doesn't save the actual documents itself. So once the document generates in Word, you have to save that document to whatever your file system is. So your file system may be in the cloud and you could save it to the cloud that way, but eState specifically won't save it to the cloud. It just saves all the information and then you can generate the document from there. So usually people just save the Word documents to whatever filing system that they have on their computer. Some people keep copies of the wills as well. It's just sort of like a personal preference thing. But the system itself won't save the documents for you. It'll just save the information, and then you would have to regenerate the document. And you would just click on this generate button in the bottom corner, and it will give you a Word document that's fully editable. So here's a little cover page, and I'll just go through it briefly. So here you've got funds and plans if you check that registered asset box. Assets passing outside the will if you check the joint asset box. There's definitions and interpretations. My children means John and any other child born to or adopted by Lauren and me. Here's our executors, Lauren, if not Lauren, Jordy, if not Jordy, John. Here's the funeral arrangement. Here's the personal effects. That special personal effects clause that generates when you gift the general personal effects as an initial gift. Here's the residue. So Lauren, if not Lauren, then the trust for the children. And then ultimately half to Jordy, half to the charity. And if you scroll all the way down, you've got your will guide that guides to the different clauses in the will. got another question. Is there a reason that Book Antiqua font is used? So no, Jordy just likes Book Antiqua, so that's his default. But you can set your own font preferences in the system so that it generates with the font that you like. So let me just show you how you would do that. So you would just go back to this clients up in the top corner, and you go over to documents. You'd have to do it for each type, but once you set it here, you don't have to do it again. So you'd go to single will, and you'd scroll down, name options, and document type. So you could choose Arial or Times New Roman if that's your preference. Book Antiqua, just Jordy likes it, but you definitely don't have to choose it. It's not for any particular reason. And then the last thing I just want to point out is this question mark button up in the top corner. So if you click on that, it'll bring you right over to our help desk, which has got lots of articles on how to do different things in the system. It also has courses, specifically the eState Planner certification course. And it's a self-paced course, it's free, and it'll take you through a will file through the system. So it's really designed to help you get to know the program better and make you more confident in your planning. So I would really recommend checking it out if you're interested in getting to know the system better. But that about wraps it up for today. Does anyone have any final questions before we go? No? If you do come across anything later, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always here to help. You can email me, you can email support, and someone's going to be happy to jump on a Zoom and help you through it. But thanks again, everyone, for joining me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.